All right, everybody, welcome back to another microeconomics lecture. We're covering monopoly today, and specifically some of the characteristics about monopoly, and hopefully we'll dig into the cost curves of monopoly before we finish out for the day. So we all, we know the term monopoly because of the game, right? But the actual technical definition of a monopoly is that one firm produces all the output for the whole market. Now, we talked about how there was free entry and exit in perfect competitive world, right? In the perfectly competitive land. Now we have a situation where there are barriers to entry. These barriers to entry may be legal. You might need to get a copyright. Somebody else might have patented it already. It might be a technological. Or it might be a market force that either discourage or prevent competitors from entering the market. Sometimes these barriers to entry have nothing to do with the government. Sometimes they have to do with the nature of the industry, right? Some individual characteristics of the industry. So when that is the case, we call those natural monopolies. And so this is when the barriers to entry are something other than legal prohibition. Oh, apologies. Whereas a legal monopoly is, having laws that prevent or severely limit.
Like starting my own bank. I don't have a capital, so that's not the government telling me I can't do it. I just can't loan money if I don't have one.
So that's a mixed one because there's also a legal monopoly in terms of you need a bank charter.
Oh, fair.
You know what I mean? But you're right. And so when do natural monopolies arise, right? That's kind of the next question that, that we segue right into, right? So, monopolies arise, or natural monopolies arise rather. So the biggest one that we have as an example is De Beers. De Beers diamonds, right? So this is when a company has control of a scarce physical resource. I'll try to find a good article or video about De Beers. It's pretty amazing how they've been able to corner the monopoly on diamonds and also completely hijack what it is to be, romantic and committed or whatever, right? Like they're the ones that came up with the an engagement ring should be 2 months of your salary or whatever. Like that is a marketing ploy by De Beers to sell their diamonds. So, anyway, small little rant. Natural monopolies also arise, in smaller local markets. And this happens for products or services that are difficult to transport. And then the last one is, essentially when the marginal cost of adding an additional customer is very low. So a lot of natural monopolies arise in the tech sector, right? After the fixed costs of the overall system are in place, the marginal cost of adding an extra person to YouTube or Facebook or whatever the case may be, right, is quite small. So those are examples also of natural monopolies. Questions on natural monopolies? Okay. So some examples of, so we talked about it, but we didn't write it down, but legal monopolies. So legal monopolies is where the government creates barriers to entry. Which limits or prohibits competition. And in a way, the government, for the last 110 years has been creating a lot of barriers to entry to business, right? I think the first business license was issued in like 1910 or something like that, And ever since then, now municipalities and states all over the world are like, yeah, you have to have this thing, right? So there's all sorts of things that you have to jump through. But we're talking specifically about the prohibiting or limiting competition. So the best example that we have of legal monopolies would be the Postal Service. And our local utilities. I can't get electricity besides from NPPD. I can't get water. Well, I guess I could get groundwater, right? But I can't get water from the sewer system without going through the city of Sadron. Same thing with garbage, right? I guess I could burn my own garbage, but I really hate the smell. So there's only one garbage collecting situation, right? So these are oftentimes, the rationale for doing this is, well, we would never get like quality broadband service if we didn't issue a monopoly right to some company, right? Because it would be inefficient and it would be more expensive for everybody because there would be it's very expensive to set up broadband or fiber lines or whatever the case may be, right? And so if like everybody is setting up power lines and fiber and everything like that throughout the town, they're going to have to recoup that cost. So there are situations where competition, especially when the fixed costs are very large, is not always going to result in driving prices lower or for the benefit of the consumer writ large. Now, there's all sorts of different ways that we can create and hold barriers to entry. I'm not going to define these. I'll just write them down, right? So common barriers to entry. And the book defines it, and we'll talk about it just a little bit. So the first one is a patent, right? So the patent is when you file for and you get an exclusive right to make, use, or sell an invention for a limited time. Other barriers might be a trademark, which is an identifying symbol or name for a particular good. Additionally, lately we've had trademark colors. If you want to use Facebook Blue for your social media site, you cannot. Right? So, if you wanted to use that blue for something else, then, there's probably some wiggle room there. But the, colors are being trademarked as well as symbols and words and stuff like that, right? Copyright. So this is a form of legal protection that prevents copying, right? It's the right to, it's the right to essentially say, you can't copy my shit. So it's the legal protection of copying for commercial purposes, original works of authorship. So this is books, music, artwork, movies, all sorts of stuff like that. And then the last one, right? So let's think about Coca-Cola. If Coca-Cola filed a patent for their secret formula, everybody would know it, and they'd be able to reverse engineer. So instead, they keep it a trade secret. So these are different methods of production kept secret by the producing firm. All right, any questions on just these different barriers? All right, let's talk about how in perfectly competitive world, the demand curve was flat, but now when we're talking about the perceived demand for a monopolist, it's going to look something different. So before, we had a perfectly competitive firm, and their individual demand curve was flat, right? This was their demand equals marginal revenue equals price. This was our former situation in the perfectly competitive world, right? Now that we're in the monopoly world, how are monopolists different than perfectly competitive firms? So perfectly competitive firms are price takers. They have to accept whatever the price is. There's many buyers and many sellers. What's going on in a monopoly? One seller. So are they price takers? Nope, they're price makers, right? And being price makers, what does that mean? The reflection of being a price maker graphically is that now your demand curve, your individual demand curve, is downward sloping. So if a monopolist chooses a high level of output, somewhere down here, it can only sell it at a low price. Compared to if a monopolist chooses a low quantity, it can sell that at a high price. De Beers, exactly. Compare this to the perfectly competitive firm, right? If I wanted to do a high quantity in perfectly competitive firm, that's what I'm getting. I'm getting this price. If I wanted to do a low quantity in perfectly competitive, that's what I'm getting. I'm getting this price. Make sense to everybody? So when we're doing a monopolist situation, we are trying to figure out, again, that profit maximizing rule, right? We're trying to find, that Q star where MR is equal to MC. But now instead of having demand equal to MR equal to price, it was so nice. They were all one line and it was flat. It was great, right? Unfortunately, once we give the demand curve a little bit of a slant, now we're going to have a marginal revenue curve that looks something like this. It has twice the slope of the demand curve, and it starts at the same point. But we're going to do our same situation as before. We're still going to maximize our profit by finding where the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. And so in order to do this, we're going to do one more graph, and then we'll do our Kahoot for the day. Oh, that's not what I want. So now I've just superimposed that thing that we talked about up here, the demand and marginal revenue curve, down here. I apologize that I switched the colors. I know that's not helpful. But I just superimposed this line right here. Oh, beep up. I superimposed that line right there. And then I superimposed this line right here. And then I drew the average total cost curve a little bit differently because we really don't have that part of it where it kind of flips up when we're talking about monopolies. It's just kind of constantly downward sloping, if that makes sense. And then we have a typical marginal cost curve that looks like a Nike swoosh that should go through the bottom of the ATC. Doesn't do the best job. Again, we can do our law of mass dots in order to try to fudge that a little bit. But again, how are we going to find where the monopolist is producing? They're going to produce where the quantity, where the marginal cost is equal to the marginal revenue. So we're going to drop our anchor there, right? And I really want you guys to start thinking about this like dropping an anchor, because you have to go up to the demand curve to get the price. Oh, thank you. MR.